They say a woman scorned will burn the world down. But what about a Luna betrayed on the night she was supposed to claim her throne? Tonight, you're about to witness the downfall of an alpha king who chose ambition over his soulmate, and the rise of a woman who walked away carrying secrets dark enough to shatter an empire. This isn't some fairy tale where love conquers all. This is raw, this is brutal, and this is just the beginning. Stick with me until the end, and if you're feeling this story, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let me know where my pack is watching from. Now, let's get into it. The throne room stank of triumph and expensive wine, but underneath it all was the metallic edge of something darker. Blood, maybe? Or betrayal. Celine Vane stood at the edge of the massive hall, her spine straight as a blade, watching the man she'd been bound to since birth wrap his arm around another woman's waist. Kael Draven, Alpha King. Her Alpha King, if the moon goddess and every law of their kind meant anything. His coronation crown sat heavy on his dark hair, still warm from the ancient blessing ceremony. His jaw was cut from stone, his eyes the color of storms over mountains, and right now those eyes were looking at Lady Seraphine like she was the only woman in the empire. The hall held 3,000 werewolves, nobles in silk, warriors in ceremonial armor. Every major pack from the Frost Territories to the Southern Wilds had sent representatives. They'd come to witness history, the coronation of the youngest Alpha King in 3 centuries, the unification of the Wolf Empire under one rule for the first time since the Blood Wars. They were witnessing history, all right, just not the kind anyone expected. Celine's fingernails bit into her palms. The pain kept her face neutral, kept her breathing steady. Around her, she could feel the stares, hear the whispers spreading like poison through the crowd. That's his Luna, his destined mate. He's really going to do it. This is madness. An elderly alpha from the eastern valleys pushed through the crowd toward her, his weathered face twisted with outrage. Marcus Thornclaw, one of the old guard who still believed in the ancient laws. Celine, he growled low, you need to challenge this. The bond... I know what the bond says, Marcus. Her voice came out colder than she intended. Let him make his choice. But the moon herself chose you for him. This is an abomination. Then the moon will have to forgive me for what comes next. Marcus's eyes widened, but before he could respond, Kael's voice boomed through the hall. He didn't use a microphone. He didn't need one. His alpha command rolled over the crowd like thunder, forcing silence, demanding attention. Tonight marks a new era for our kind. He stood on the elevated platform where his father had stood, where his grandfather had stood, where the Draven line had ruled for nearly a century. Seraphine stood beside him in a gown the color of fresh blood, her smile sharp and satisfied. She was beautiful in the way a knife was beautiful, all edges and shine and promised pain. Kael continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. For too long, we've been divided by old traditions that no longer serve us. For too long, we've let superstition dictate our strength. Celine's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. She knew where this was going. They'd fought about it for months before tonight, back when he still pretended her opinion mattered. The bond between Alpha and Luna, Kael said, and Celine felt 3,000 pairs of eyes slide toward her like daggers, has always been considered sacred, unbreakable, chosen by forces beyond our control. He paused, and in that pause, Celine could hear hearts beating too fast, could smell fear and anticipation mixing in the air. But I am your king, Kael declared, and I choose my own fate. I choose strength over sentiment. I choose the future over the past. He turned to Seraphine, and the tenderness in his expression made Celine's stomach turn. Not because she loved him, the bond between them had shriveled into something cold and sharp months ago, but because she'd seen him look at her that way once, before ambition had eaten him alive from the inside out. Lady Seraphine has proven herself a true partner, Kael said. Strategic, ruthless when necessary. She understands what this empire needs to survive. Together, we will forge a dynasty that doesn't bow to ancient superstitions, but builds its own destiny. The crowd erupted, half in outrage, half in shocked approval. The younger wolves, the ambitious ones, they cheered. The old families, the traditional packs, they looked ready to tear Kael apart. Through it all, Seraphine's smile never wavered. She lifted her chin, her green eyes scanning the crowd until they found Celine. For a moment, their gazes locked. Seraphine's expression said everything her mouth didn't. I won. You lost. Get out. Celine held that stare, her face empty of everything except a calm that made Seraphine's smile finally flicker. Then Celine did something no one expected. She laughed. Not loud. Not hysterical. Just a short, sharp sound that cut through the chaos like a gunshot. The hall went silent again, every eye turning to her. Kael's expression darkened. Celine. His voice carried a warning. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder? Celine stepped forward, the crowd parting around her like water. Her dress was simple compared to Seraphine's elaborate gown. Deep midnight blue, no jewels, no ornament except for a single silver cuff on her wrist. She looked like what she was, a weapon dressed up for ceremony. You think you're making this hard for me, Kael? She reached the steps leading up to the platform. Two of Kael's personal guards moved to block her path, but Kael raised a hand, stopping them. He wanted this confrontation. She could see it in his eyes. He wanted her to break, to beg, to give him the satisfaction of her pain. You were always too proud, he said, his voice pitched for her ears only as she climbed the steps. Too stubborn to see what we could become if you'd just bend. Celine stopped 3 feet from him, close enough that everyone could see her face, hear her words. Is that what you call it? Bending? I thought the word was groveling. A muscle jumped in Kael's jaw. Seraphine's hand tightened on his arm, her nails digging in through the fabric of his ceremonial coat. You had every chance, Kael said, every opportunity to be what I needed. And what did you need exactly? Celine asked. Her voice was quiet, conversational, but it carried through the silent hall like a blade sliding from a sheath. A woman who'd smile while you sold out every value you claimed to have? Someone who'd help you piss on every tradition that kept this empire from tearing itself apart during the Blood Wars? Those traditions nearly destroyed us, Kael snapped. No. Celine took another step closer. She could smell Seraphine's perfume, expensive and cloying. Men like your father nearly destroyed us. Men who put power over honor, over truth. Something flickered in Kael's eyes. Anger. Or maybe recognition. Maybe fear. My father built this empire, he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Did he? Celine tilted her head, studying him like he was a stranger. Or did he just take credit for standing on a pile of bodies he didn't earn the right to kill? The crowd stirred. Whispers spread like wildfire. Kael's face went stone hard, but Celine saw his fingers twitch, saw the tell that meant she'd landed a hit somewhere deep. Seraphine stepped forward, her smile venomous. You're embarrassing yourself, Celine. Accept reality with some dignity. Celine turned her full attention to the other woman. Up close, Seraphine was even more beautiful and even more hollow. Her eyes were empty of everything except calculation. Dignity, Celine repeated. That's interesting, coming from a woman who's been warming the king's bed since 3 weeks before his father's funeral. Seraphine's mask cracked. Just for a second, but enough. The crowd gasped. Kael's hand shot out, gripping Celine's arm. Enough, he snarled, and there was real fury in his voice now. Real pain. You will not... I will not what? Celine jerked her arm free, and the strength it took to break his grip shocked them both. She'd been training, hard, in ways he didn't know about. Stay silent while you humiliate me in front of the entire empire? While you throw away a bond that's kept our kind alive for thousands of years? That bond was a chain, Kael said, but his voice shook. I'm breaking it. I'm free. Celine looked at him for a long moment. Really looked, past the crown and the ceremony and the man he was pretending to be. She saw the boy she'd grown up with, the one who'd sworn on his mother's grave that he'd never become his father. She saw the exact moment he'd broken that promise, saw it festering inside him like rot. You think you're free, she said softly. Oh, Kael, you have no idea what chains you've just wrapped around your throat. She turned, descending the steps. The crowd parted again, but this time it felt different. Respectful. Almost fearful. Celine, Kael called after her, and there was something desperate in his voice that made her pause. You walk out that door, you're done. You're nothing. No pack. No title. No protection. She looked back over her shoulder, and her smile was the coldest thing in that warm, crowded hall. Then I'll be nothing, but you, my king, you'll be exactly what your father made you. And that's so much worse. She walked. Every step echoed in the silence. 3,000 wolves watched her go, watched her spine stay straight, watched her not look back even once. Marcus Thornclaw fell into step beside her as she reached the massive doors. 2 other older alphas joined them, Vera Nightshade from the western forests and Johann Ironclaw from the mountain territories. The old guard. The traditional families. "Where will you go?" Marcus asked quietly. "North," Celine said, "the forbidden territories." Vera's breath caught. "Celine, those lands are cursed. The old king's supporters, I know what's up there," Celine cut her off. "I've known for months." She reached into the hidden pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. She pressed it into Marcus's hands. "When the time is right," she said, "you'll know what to do with this." "What is it?" "The truth," Celine said, "about the Draven bloodline, about how Kael's father really took the throne 30 years ago." Marcus unfolded the corner of the document, his eyes going wide. His face went pale. "Where did you get this?" "From the one person who survived the night of the coup," Celine said. "She's been waiting 30 years for someone to listen." I listened. "You can't just leave," Johann said urgently. "If what this implies is true, you need to—" "If I stay, Kael will find a way to silence me. Seraphine will make sure of it." She looked back at the throne room, at the massive doors still open, the celebration resuming inside. "No. I go north. I find the others. And when the time comes, when he's shown this empire exactly what kind of king he really is, I'll come back." "And then?" Vera asked. "Then everyone learns what happens when you build a throne on lies." She left them standing there, walked out into the cold night air. The palace grounds were illuminated by 1,000 torches, but beyond the gates was darkness. Real darkness, the kind that existed in the wild places where humans didn't go and weak wolves didn't survive. Celine shifted as soon as she cleared the gates. Her wolf form was smaller than Kael's, leaner, built for speed and endurance rather than brute strength. Silver white fur, ice blue eyes, scars she'd earned in training hidden beneath her coat. She ran. North, like she'd said. Away from the empire, away from the celebrations, away from the man who'd chosen power over her and didn't yet understand what that choice would cost him. Behind her in the throne room, Kael stood frozen on the platform, Seraphine's hand on his arm, the crown heavy on his head. He watched the doors where Celine had disappeared, and something in his chest twisted sharp and painful. "Is something wrong, my king?" Seraphine asked, her voice honey-sweet. "No," Kael said, forcing himself to turn back to the crowd, to smile, to accept their cheers and their pledges of loyalty. "Nothing's wrong." But his hand moved unconsciously to his chest, where the bond to Celine lived. Felt different now, colder, sharper, like a wound that hadn't quite closed. In the shadows at the back of the hall, an elderly nobleman watched the celebration with calculating eyes. Lord Cedric Ashbourne, head of the High Council, advisor to 3 generations of Draven kings. His fingers drummed against his wine glass in a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Beside him, a younger councilman leaned in close. "It's done then. The Luna is gone." Cedric's smile was thin and satisfied. "Everything is proceeding exactly as planned. Kael thinks he made this choice. Seraphine thinks she won. Neither of them understands they're both dancing on strings. And if the girl talks, if she reveals—" "She won't," Cedric said calmly. "She's too proud. She'll run north, she'll lick her wounds, and by the time she realizes what's really happening, it'll be too late." He sipped his wine. "Besides, who would believe her? She's the rejected Luna, the woman scorned. Any accusation she makes will sound like revenge, and when we're ready to move against Kael," Cedric's eyes glittered in the torchlight, "then we'll use her ourselves, turn her pain into a weapon. The old families still love her, still believe in the sacred bond. When the time comes, she'll be our righteous cause, our symbol of tradition betrayed." The younger councilman shook his head in admiration. "Brilliant." "No," Cedric corrected. "Necessary. Kael's father understood this. Power isn't taken, it's cultivated, grown in darkness until it's ready to bloom." He raised his glass toward the platform where Kael stood with Seraphine. "To the new king. May he rule exactly as long as we need him to." They drank to that, Miles away, running through forests that grew denser and darker with each passing hour, Celine felt the bond in her chest pulse once, sharp and painful. She stumbled, catching herself against a tree, breathing hard. Her wolf form rippled, shifting back to human. She stood naked in the moonlight, steam rising from her skin in the cold air. Her hand pressed against her sternum, feeling the bond twist and burn. Kael was celebrating. She could feel his satisfaction, his relief, his conviction that he'd made the right choice. And underneath it all, buried so deep he probably didn't recognize it himself, was regret, sharp and poisonous and growing. "Good," Celine whispered to the darkness. "Feel it. Let it fester." She shifted again, kept running. The forbidden territories weren't forbidden because of curses or monsters. They were forbidden because of truth. Because 30 years ago, after Kael's father had slaughtered the rightful royal family and seized the throne, the survivors had fled north. The loyalists, the witnesses, the ones who knew what really happened the night the Empire's last true king died. They'd been waiting, building strength in secret, gathering evidence. And 6 months ago, they'd sent a messenger south, an old woman with scars on her face and fury in her eyes. She'd found Celine, told her everything, showed her proof. Celine had spent months verifying the story, using her position as Kael's intended Luna to access records that should have been destroyed, interviewing elderly servants who remembered the night of the coup, piecing together a truth so ugly it had made her sick. And then she'd made a choice. Not the choice Kael would have expected. Not the choice anyone would have expected. She'd chosen to let him betray her publicly, let him show the Empire exactly who he was. Let him think he'd won. Because a king who betrayed the sacred bond, who spat on tradition for personal ambition, who chose a manipulative noble over his destined mate, that king would make enemies. Fast. The old families would turn on him. The traditional pacts would withdraw their support. And when Kael was weak, when his empire started to crack, when Seraphine and the council showed their true intentions, that's when Celine would return. Not as the rejected Luna begging for scraps, but as the keeper of secrets that would burn the Draven dynasty to the ground. She ran faster, the northern territories opening up before her like a promise, like destiny. Behind her, far to the south, Kael woke up in his royal chambers with Seraphine asleep beside him. The celebration had lasted until dawn. He'd drunk too much, smiled too much, accepted too many pledges of loyalty that felt somehow hollow. He got out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake Seraphine, and walked to the window. The sun was rising over his empire, his kingdom, everything he'd ever wanted. So why did his chest feel like something vital had been carved out of it? He touched the spot over his heart where the bond lived. It was still there, thinner now, damaged but not broken. He'd been told that rejecting your destined mate would sever the bond completely, but that hadn't happened. Instead, it just felt wrong, like a limb that had been twisted in its socket. On the nightstand, a sealed letter waited. It had been delivered during the celebration, marked urgent, but Kael had been too caught up in the moment to read it. He opened it now. The handwriting was shaky, old. The message was brief. "Your Majesty, you don't know me, but I knew your father. I was there the night he took the throne. I saw what he did to the royal family. I saw what he promised the High Council in exchange for their support. You should ask Lord Cedric why he was so eager to see you marry Seraphine instead of your true Luna. You should ask what they're planning once you've served your purpose. A king is only as secure as the secrets he keeps, and yours are buried in blood. The North remembers. We all remember. There was no signature." Kael's hand shook as he read it again. Then again. His mind raced through possibilities, through paranoia, through denial. It was a lie. Had to be. Some enemy trying to sow discord on his coronation night. Some supporter of Celine trying to make him doubt himself. But the handwriting, the specifics, the mention of Lord Cedric. Kael looked at Seraphine, still sleeping peacefully in his bed. He thought about how quickly she'd appeared in his life after his father's death. How eager the council had been to support their relationship. How perfectly she'd positioned herself as the answer to all his problems. He thought about Celine walking away last night, her final words echoing in his memory. "You'll be exactly what your father made you." What had his father made him? Kael crumpled the letter and threw it into the fireplace, watching it burn. He was being paranoid. Celine had gotten into his head, that was all. She'd always been too clever, too observant. She'd seen his doubts and planted seeds designed to grow into paranoia. He was the king. He'd made his choice. He'd forge his own destiny. But as he climbed back into bed, as Seraphine stirred and smiled and pulled him close, Kyle couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. And somewhere in the forbidden north, running towards secrets and allies, and a truth that would shake the foundations of an empire, Celine smiled in the darkness and kept running. The game had only just begun. The northern territories smelled like death and old secrets. Celine had been running for 3 days straight, stopping only when her body forced her to, drinking from ice-cold streams that tasted like metal and earth. Her wolf form was built for endurance, but even she had limits. By the time she crossed into the truly forbidden zones, past the last markers that warned travelers to turn back, her muscles were screaming and her vision had started to blur at the edges. She shifted back to human form in a clearing surrounded by ancient pines, their trunks so thick 3 men couldn't wrap their arms around them. The air here felt different, heavier, like the land itself was holding its breath. "You're late," the voice came from above. Celine didn't flinch, didn't reach for a weapon. She'd been expecting this. A woman dropped from the branches, landing in a crouch that spoke of decades of combat training. She was old, maybe 70, with silver hair cut short and brutal scars crossing her face like a roadmap of violence. Her eyes were the palest gray Celine had ever seen, almost colorless. Elena Korvath, the last surviving member of the true royal family's personal guard, the woman who'd sent the messenger 6 months ago. "I had to make it look real," Celine said, her voice rough from days without speaking. "If I'd run too soon, Kyle would have known I was planning something." Elena circled her slowly, assessing. And the humiliation? That was necessary too? Every bit of it. Celine met her gaze without wavering. The old families needed to see Kyle for what he is. A man who'd spit on sacred tradition for power. They won't support him now. Not really. They'll smile and bow and wait for him to fail. Smart. Elena's scarred mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. Cold as hell, but smart. Your mother would have approved. Don't talk about my mother. Why not? She was just as ruthless as you're becoming. Elena turned and started walking deeper into the forest. That's not an insult, girl. Ruthless is what kept her alive in your father's house as long as it did. Ruthless is what's going to keep you alive now. Come on. The others are waiting. Celine followed, her bare feet silent on the needle-covered ground. How many? 43, Elena said. Survivors and their children. Loyalists who fled south over the years when they couldn't stomach the Draven lies anymore. A few young ones who figured out the truth on their own and came looking for answers. That's not an army. No, it's not. But it's a start. Elena glanced back. And you brought us something more valuable than soldiers, didn't you? Celine touched the leather pouch hanging from her neck, hidden beneath her shirt. The documents inside felt like they weighed more than she did. Proof. Bloodline records that Kyle's father tried to destroy. Testimony from servants who witnessed the massacre. Financial records showing payments from the High Council to the Draven family 3 weeks before the coup. I brought the truth, she said quietly. Whether that's valuable depends on what we do with it. They walked for another hour before the settlement came into view. Calling it a settlement was generous. It was more like a war camp that had been occupied for 30 years, grown up and permanent out of necessity. Rough cabins built from pine and stone, a central clearing with a fire pit, training grounds worn bare by decades of constant use. Wolves moved through the space with the efficiency of soldiers. Young and old, men and women, all of them carrying themselves like fighters. They stopped what they were doing when Celine appeared, their eyes tracking her movement with an intensity that made her skin prickle. A massive man stepped out of the largest cabin, and Celine's breath caught. She knew this man. Everyone did. Garrett Ironpaw, former general of the Royal Army, a legend who'd supposedly died during the coup. He was very much alive. Older, grayer, but still built like a mountain with fists that could crush skulls. So you're Vane's daughter, he said, his voice like grinding stone. You look like her. Same eyes, same stubborn jaw. I'm told I got her personality too, Celine said. That's what worries me. Garrett crossed his arms. Your mother was brilliant and brutal and died because she trusted the wrong man at the wrong time. I won't have history repeating itself in my camp. I'm not my mother." "No." "Then why'd you let that boy humiliate you in front of the entire empire instead of cutting his throat when you had the chance?" "Because dead, he's a martyr." Celine stepped closer, ignoring the way the other wolves tensed around her. "Alive and corrupt, he's a problem that will destroy himself. I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in justice. There's a difference." Garrett stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling down a mountain. "Justice." "Hell, you sound like the old king. He used to say that too, right before your precious Kael's father put a knife through his heart." The words hit like a physical blow, but Celine didn't let it show. "Then help me make sure his death meant something." The camp gathered that night around the central fire. Celine laid out everything she'd learned, every piece of evidence she'd collected, every hole in the Draven dynasty's story. The wolves listened in silence, their faces illuminated by flickering firelight, and Celine could see the moment each of them understood what she was really proposing. "You want to start a civil war?" an older woman said quietly. "That's what this is." "I want to expose the truth," Celine corrected. "If that starts a war, then the empire was already broken. I'm just showing everyone the cracks." A younger fighter, maybe 20, with wild red hair and scars on his knuckles, leaned forward. "And what about you? What do you get out of this? Your mate bond rejected, your position stripped. Seems like you've got personal reasons for wanting Kael to burn." "I do," Celine said simply. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise. He humiliated me, used me, threw away something sacred because it wasn't convenient for his ambition. Yeah, I want him to pay for that. But I also want the families who died 30 years ago to be remembered. I want the lies to stop. If my personal vendetta aligns with justice, I'm okay with that." Garrett grunted his approval. "At least you're honest about it. I'm sick of people pretending to be noble when they're really just angry." Over the next week, Celine trained with the Northern Wolves. They fought differently than the Empire soldiers. All efficiency and survival instinct with none of the ceremonial flourishes she'd been taught. Elena worked her until she could barely stand, then pushed her further. "You fight like a princess," Elena said after knocking Celine on her ass for the 5th time. "All pretty form and no killer instinct." Celine spat blood into the dirt. "Then teach me to fight like a survivor." Elena's scarred face split into a genuine smile. "Now you're talking." The training was brutal. Hand-to-hand combat that left Celine covered in bruises. Knife work that taught her where to cut to disable versus where to cut to kill. Strategy sessions where Garrett made her plan assaults on theoretical targets, then tore apart her plans and made her start over. But the worst training was the mental conditioning. Elena would wake her in the middle of the night, drag her out of bed, and interrogate her about her plans, her motivations, her breaking points. "Kael captures you," Elena said one night, her knife pressed against Celine's throat. "Seraphine wants to make an example of you. What do you do?" "I don't get captured," Celine growled. "Wrong answer. You're not invincible." "Try again." "I remind them that killing me makes me a martyr, that the old families will revolt." "Better. But what if they don't care? What if they're desperate enough that martyrdom doesn't matter?" "Then I make sure I've already released the evidence. Make sure my death means they burn too." Elena pulled the knife away, nodding. "Good. Never assume you'll survive this, girl. Plan for your death like you plan for victory. That's how you actually live." While Celine trained, news from the south trickled into the camp through informants and sympathizers. The reports painted an empire already starting to fracture. Kael had sent hunters after Celine within days of her departure, but they'd lost her trail at the northern border. The official story was that she'd been overcome with grief and shame, that she was wandering the wilderness in mourning. But the old families knew better, and their silence was louder than any accusation. Then the attack started. Small at first, raids on supply lines feeding the capital, accidents at noble estates allied with the High Council, anonymous letters arriving at Alpha compounds, asking questions about the Draven bloodline, about the night of the coup, about financial arrangements that should have stayed buried. Kael's hunters returned with nothing but excuses and casualties. Something in the northern territories was killing them. Some said it was vengeful spirits of the old king's loyalists. Others whispered about a silver wolf with ice-blue eyes, who moved like smoke and struck like lightning. The truth was simpler and more strategic. Selene wasn't acting alone anymore. The Northern Wolves had been waiting 30 years for an opportunity like this, and they weren't wasting it. "Is this necessary?" Selene asked Garrett one night after they'd sabotaged a weapons shipment heading to a Council-allied territory. "We're killing our own kind." "They stopped being our kind when they chose to serve a false throne," Garrett said flatly. "You want to play nice, go back south and apologize to your king. You want to win, you accept that war is ugly and people die. There's a difference between strategic targets and slaughter." "I agree. Which is why we're only hitting military and political targets. No civilians, no pups, no one who isn't actively supporting the Draven regime." Garrett's eyes were hard as stone. "But don't mistake precision for mercy. This is still war, and war requires bodies." Back in the capital, Kael was starting to understand just how badly he'd miscalculated. The Empire-gathering moon was approaching, the annual event where representatives from every major Alpha clan gathered to settle disputes, make alliances, and reinforce the bonds that held their kind together. Normally it was a formality, a ceremony to remind everyone who held power. This year felt different, dangerous. "You need to cancel it," Seraphine said, pacing his private study like a caged predator. "The attacks are getting worse. The old families are restless. If you put all the alphas in one place right now, it's not going to be a gathering. It's going to be a powder keg." "I can't cancel," Kael said, rubbing his temples where a headache had been growing for days. "That shows weakness. That tells everyone I'm afraid." "You should be afraid." Seraphine stopped pacing, her green eyes sharp. "Someone's coordinating these attacks. Someone with resources and knowledge of our infrastructure. This isn't random. It's Selene." "We don't know that." "I know it." Kael stood, walking to the window that overlooked the palace grounds. "I can feel it, through the bond. She's out there, she's angry, and she's planning something. The bond should be severed. You rejected her. Should be. Isn't." Kael touched his chest where the connection lived, thinner now, but still present, still sending him flashes of emotion that didn't belong to him. Rage, determination, something that felt almost like satisfaction when news of the attacks reached the capital. "She's still tied to me, and I think she's using it against me." Seraphine moved behind him, her hand sliding up his arms. "Then we cut it completely. There are rituals, dark ones, but effective." "No." The word came out sharper than he intended. "I'm not using dark magic. That's exactly what my enemies would want. Proof that I'm becoming what they claim I already am." "Your enemies don't need proof. They've already made up their minds." Seraphine's voice turned cold. "You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. Again." Kael pulled away from her touch. "I need air." He left her standing there, walked the palace halls until he found himself in his father's old study. The room hadn't been touched since the funeral. Books lined the walls, maps spread across the massive desk, bottles of expensive liquor gathering dust on the sideboard. Kael poured himself a drink and sat in his father's chair. It felt too big, like he was a child playing at being king. He opened the desk drawers one by one, looking for something he couldn't name. Answers, justification, proof that he'd made the right choices. In the bottom drawer, hidden under financial ledgers, he found a journal. His father's handwriting, cramped and precise. The entries dated back 30 years. Kael's hands shook as he opened it to a random page. "The councilmen are growing impatient. They want assurances that once I take the throne, their interests will be protected. I've promised them positions, territory, control over the military infrastructure. Cedric especially is concerned about the old king's supporters. He's right to worry. If anyone discovers what we're planning, they'll execute us all for treason. But they won't discover it. I've been too careful. The king trusts me. His family trusts me. By the time they understand what's happening, it will be too late. Sometimes I wonder if this is worth it, if power purchased with betrayal can ever feel legitimate. Then I remember what the old king said when I asked for his daughter's hand for my son. He said the Draven line wasn't worthy of joining the royal family. Said we were too ambitious, too hungry, too common. He's right about that. We are hungry. And when this is done, when I'm sitting on his throne and his bloodline is erased from history, he'll understand exactly what hunger can accomplish." Kael dropped the journal like it had burned him. His father's words echoed in his skull, mixing with Selene's final statement before she'd left. You'll be exactly what your father made you. A knock on the door made him jump. Lord Cedric entered without waiting for permission, his elderly face arranged in an expression of concern. Your Majesty, I heard you were upset. I wanted to check on you before the gathering. Kale stared at the old man, seeing him with new eyes. How long have you been planning this? Cedric's expression didn't change. Planning what, sire? All of it. Kale stood, his hands braced on the desk. My father's coup. My coronation. Seraphine. How long have you been moving pieces around the board, waiting for the right moment to cash in? The silence stretched between them like a blade. Then Cedric smiled. It was a terrible smile, cold and satisfied and completely void of pretense. 32 years, he said calmly, since the day I realized the old king would never give people like us the power we deserved. Your father understood that. He was willing to do what was necessary. I'm hoping you inherited that same practical nature. Get out. Kyle, be reasonable. Get out! The alpha command in his voice rattled the windows. Cedric's smile never wavered, but he bowed slightly and left without another word. Kyle stood alone in his father's study, the journal open on the desk, his world crumbling around him like sand. Everything Celine had implied, everything that anonymous letter had suggested, it was all true. He'd built his throne on bodies. His father had murdered the rightful king and erased an entire bloodline. The High Council had orchestrated it all, and now they were using Seraphine to control him the same way they'd controlled his father. And Celine had known. She'd tried to warn him, and he'd chosen ambition over truth. The bond in his chest pulsed sharp and painful, and for a moment he could swear he felt Celine's presence. Not her location, but her emotion, cold determination, righteous fury. The absolute certainty of someone who'd made a choice and wouldn't look back. Kale grabbed his coat and left the palace. He needed to think, needed to move before the walls closed in completely. He shifted and ran, letting his wolf form tear through the palace grounds and out into the empire proper. He ran for hours, no destination in mind, just desperate motion to quiet the chaos in his head. He ended up at the border of the northern territories, the same place he'd ordered his hunters to search for Celine. The same place they'd died or returned empty-handed and traumatized. Kale stood at the tree line in human form, staring into the darkness between the ancient pines. I know you're out there, he said quietly. I know you can probably hear me. The forest didn't answer, but the bond in his chest tightened, painful and sharp. I'm sorry. The words felt foreign in his mouth. I made a choice. A bad one. I thought I was being strong, but I was just being stupid. And now I'm paying for it. We're all paying for it. Still nothing. Just wind through branches and the distant call of nightbirds. Kale's hands clenched into fists. If you're planning something, if you're going to come back and burn everything down, I deserve it. But the Empire doesn't. The innocent people caught between us, they don't deserve to suffer because I was too blind to see what was happening. He waited. Part of him hoping for a response, a sign, anything to indicate that Celine had heard him, and maybe, possibly, might consider forgiveness. Deep in the forest, hidden in shadows and watching through a rifle scope, Celine saw every word form on Kael's lips. She was too far away to hear, but she'd learned to read lips during her training with Elena. Old spy techniques, useful when you needed to know what your enemies were saying from a distance. He's apologizing, Elena whispered beside her. Pathetic. No. Celine lowered the rifle, her expression unreadable. He's scared. That's different. That's useful. You going to forgive him? Celine laughed, short and sharp. Forgiveness isn't the play here. Let him stew. Let him doubt. Scared kings make mistakes. And when he makes his next one at the gathering, when everyone sees what he's become, that's when we move. She stood, slinging the rifle over her shoulder. Come on, we need to get the evidence ready for transport. Marcus will be waiting at the rendezvous point tomorrow night. Elena followed, but she kept glancing back at where Kael stood alone at the forest edge. That's still your mate, girl. Bond might be damaged, but it's not broken. When the time comes, you going to be able to do what needs doing? Celine touched her chest where the bond lived, felt Kael's regret and fear pulsing through like poison. I've already done the hard part. I walked away. Compared to that, destroying him is going to be easy. But even as she said it, the bond twisted sharp, and she tasted bile in the back of her throat. Lying to Elena was one thing, lying to herself was harder. The Empire Gathering Moon was 3 days away. Representatives from every major clan were already traveling toward the capital. Old grudges and new alliances would collide under one roof, and Celine was going to walk into the center of it all and detonate the truth like a bomb. The northern wolves prepared her like they were sending a soldier into battle. New clothes that looked humble but hid weapons. Documents sealed in waterproof leather that would survive fire and blood. Instructions on where to stand, who to speak to, how to time the revelation for maximum impact. "You won't survive this," Garrett said bluntly the night before she was set to leave. "Even if everything goes perfectly, even if the clans turn on Kael like we expect, you're still going to be the catalyst, the symbol. And symbols get destroyed when they become inconvenient." "I know. So why do it? Why not let Marcus deliver the evidence? Let someone else be the face of this?" Celine met his gaze. "Because Kael needs to see me, needs to understand that I didn't break, that walking away from him was the strongest thing I ever did." She smiled, cold and sharp. "And because I want to watch his face when his world ends." Garrett studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled a knife from his belt and handed it to her. "This was the old king's. He gave it to me the day before your Kael's father murdered him. Said it had never tasted innocent blood, only the guilty and the corrupt. It was a beautiful weapon. Simple blade, worn handle, but balanced perfectly." "When the time comes," Garrett said quietly, "you make sure that stays true." Celine took the knife, feeling its weight. "I will." She left at dawn, running south in wolf form, carrying everything that would destroy an empire in a pack strapped to her back. The journey took 2 days. By the time she reached the rendezvous point outside the capital, Marcus Thornclaw was waiting with a contingent of old family alphas. They looked at her like she'd returned from the dead. Maybe she had. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked, his weathered face creased with concern. "No." Celine shifted back to human form, accepting the clothes Marcus offered. "But I'm doing it anyway." Vera Nightshade stepped forward, her expression troubled. "If this goes wrong, Kael will execute you for treason. The council will make sure of it. If this goes wrong," Celine said calmly, "Kael won't live long enough to execute anyone. The council will do it for him and install their own puppet. So it can't go wrong." She looked at each of them in turn. "You all know what to do. When I give the signal, you back my claims. You demand a full investigation. You turn the gathering into a trial. Understood?" They nodded, grim-faced and determined. Johann Ironclaw cleared his throat. "Your mother would be proud of you. Terrified but proud. My mother's dead because she trusted the wrong people." Celine's voice was flat. "I'm not making that mistake." The gathering hall was even more massive than the coronation room, designed to hold representatives from every clan in the empire. Celine entered through a side door, hooded and anonymous, while the alphas filed in through the main entrance with all their ceremonial glory. She found a spot in the upper gallery, hidden among minor nobles and territory representatives. From here she had a clear view of the entire floor below. Kael entered last, Seraphine at his side, Lord Cedric and the High Council flanking them like guards. He looked older than he had at the coronation. Tired. The crown on his head seemed heavier. Celine's fingers traced the edge of the documents in her coat. Not yet. Wait for the right moment. The gathering proceeded normally at first. Territory disputes were settled. Trade agreements were ratified. It was all bureaucratic theater, the real negotiations having happened weeks ago in private rooms. Then Lord Cedric stood, his voice carrying through the hall with practiced authority. "There's one final matter before we close the session. The question of the rejected Luna. Celine Vane's disappearance has created uncertainty about pack alliances and bloodline contracts. We move to officially declare her, I'm not dead." Celine's voice cut through the hall like a blade. Every head turned, searching for the source. She lowered her hood and stood, letting them all see her face. "Though I'm sure that's disappointing for some of you," she continued, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. "Sorry to ruin your plans." Kael shot to his feet, his face draining of color. "Celine, Your Majesty," she inclined her head in mock deference. "Surprised to see me? I thought you'd have assumed I died of shame in the wilderness by now." The hall erupted in whispers. Seraphine's hand tightened on Kael's arm, her perfect face twisting into something ugly. "Guards!" Cedric snapped. "Seize that woman for what?" Celine descended the stairs slowly, every eye tracking her movement. Speaking truth? Returning to face the empire that cast me out? Or maybe you want to arrest me for discovering what really happened 30 years ago when the Draven family took this throne. The whispers turned into a roar. Alphas surged to their feet. Kael stood frozen, watching her approach like she was a ghost made flesh. Celine reached the main floor and pulled out the documents. She held them high enough for everyone to see. I have bloodline records, financial transfers, testimony from witnesses who survived the coup that brought the Draven dynasty to power, and all of it proves the same thing. She looked directly at Kael. Your father murdered the rightful king and his entire family. He was helped by members of the High Council in exchange for power and territory. Everything you've built, everything you think you are, it's founded on a massacre. Lies! Cedric's voice cracked with fury. This is a rejected Luna's revenge, nothing more. Then let's verify it. Marcus Thornclaw stepped forward from the crowd. Let's examine the documents. Let's interview the witnesses. If it's lies, it'll fall apart under scrutiny. But if it's truth, the hall exploded into chaos. Alphas shouting, guards moving to surround Celine, council members screaming for order. Through it all, Celine locked eyes with Kael. His expression was devastated, broken, everything she'd hoped to see when she'd planned this moment. So why did it feel so hollow? Kael raised his hand, and the alpha command in the gesture forced silence across the hall. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but absolute. Let her present the evidence. Let every claim be examined. If my father committed the crimes she's describing, then the Empire deserves to know. Your Majesty, you can't... Seraphine started. I said, let her present the evidence. Kael's eyes never left Celine's face. I'm done with secrets. I'm done with lies. Whatever comes next, we face it in the light. And Celine realized with sudden, terrible clarity that she'd just pushed them all past the point where any of them could turn back. The game she'd started had become something bigger than revenge. It had become a reckoning. The silence after Kael's command was more dangerous than the chaos that had preceded it. Celine stood in the center of the gathering hall, holding documents that could destroy a dynasty, surrounded by 300 of the most powerful wolves in the Empire. And for the first time since she'd started this war, she felt the full weight of what she was about to do. Not doubt, not regret. Just the cold understanding that once she opened her mouth, people were going to die and empires were going to burn, and there would be no going back for anyone. Kael descended from the platform, moving through the crowd that parted for him like water. He stopped 10 feet from her, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough to maintain the distance between king and subject. His eyes searched her face like he was looking for the woman he'd known before ambition had twisted them both into weapons. Show me, he said quietly. Celine pulled the first document from the leather case. It was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. She held it up so the nearest alphas could see. This is a bloodline record from the Royal Archives, dated 31 years ago. It shows the direct lineage of King Aldrich Ravenshield and his 3 children. She let that sink in. 3 children. Not 0. Not extinct. 3. A younger alpha pushed forward, squinting at the document. I've seen the official records. They say the royal line ended with Aldrich. No heirs. Because someone rewrote history. Celine pulled out another document, this one covered in official seals. This is the amended record, filed 2 weeks after Aldrich's death. Same archive, same seal. But suddenly the children disappear. Suddenly there's no mention of Princess Liana, age 16, Prince Corvin, age 14, or Princess Elena, age 9. The hall went deadly quiet. Even the sound of breathing seemed to stop. Kael's face had gone white. Where did you get this? From someone who was there the night your father murdered them all. That's a lie, Seraphine said, but her voice lacked conviction. My father served the Draven family loyally. He would never... Your father was paid 50,000 gold marks 3 weeks before the coup. Celine pulled out a financial ledger, threw it at Seraphine's feet. So was Lord Cedric. So were 6 other council members who are standing in this room right now. The money came from a secret Draven account that was supposed to fund military expansion. Instead, it purchased a massacre and rewrote history. Cedric's face twisted with fury. This is fabrication. Desperate lies from a woman who can't accept that she was rejected. Then explain this. The voice came from the entrance to the hall. Every head turned. An old woman walked in, supported by Marcus Thornclaw on one side and Garrett Ironpaw on the other. She was ancient, her body twisted with age and old injuries, but her eyes were sharp as broken glass. Those pale gray eyes that Celine had seen in the northern camp. Elena Korvath, former captain of the Royal Guard. The woman everyone had assumed died 30 years ago. The hall erupted again, but Elena's voice cut through the noise like a blade. I was there. I watched Elias Draven and his pack tear through the royal family like they were hunting deer. I heard Princess Liana begging for her little sister's life before they slit her throat. I saw 9-year-old Elena, my namesake, try to run and get cut down in the gardens. She moved forward slowly, every step clearly painful, until she stood beside Celine. I survived because I was smart enough to play dead and coward enough to run instead of dying with honor. I've lived 30 years with that shame, but I won't die with the lie. Kael looked like he'd been gutted. His hands were shaking, his breathing ragged. My father wouldn't. Your father was a monster. Elena's voice was flat and final. He was also brilliant and ruthless and everything you've apparently inherited. The only difference is you're too weak to own it. The words hit Kael like physical blows. Celine almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Lord Cedric had gone very still, his elderly face calculating rapidly. This proves nothing, he said smoothly. An old woman's testimony from 30 years ago? Documents that could have been forged? This is political theater, not evidence. Then let's discuss evidence. Celine pulled out the final document, the one she'd been saving. This is a letter written by Elias Draven to Lord Cedric, dated 1 month before the coup. In it, he outlines the entire plan, the timing, the targets, the story they'd tell afterward about a tragic accident that killed the royal family. And at the bottom, both their signatures. She held it up, and even from a distance, the handwriting was clearly visible, clearly authentic. Kael moved before anyone could stop him, snatching the letter from her hands. He read it once. Twice. His face went from white to gray, his hands crushing the paper. No, he whispered. This can't. He told me they died in a fire. He said he tried to save them. He said what you needed to hear. Garrett's voice rolled through the hall like thunder. Because that's what monsters do. They lie to their children so their children become monsters too. Kael looked up at Celine, and the betrayal in his eyes was total. You knew. This whole time, you knew what my father was, and you said nothing. I tried, Celine said quietly. I tried to tell you that your bloodline was corrupt, that the council was using you, that Seraphine was— Don't you dare! Seraphine's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare pretend this is about justice. This is revenge because Kael chose me over you. No. Celine turned to face her fully. This is about truth. But since you brought it up, let's talk about your role in all this. She pulled out another set of documents, and Seraphine's perfect face went very still. You weren't chosen by Kael. You were assigned to him. Celine read from the papers. Lord Cedric's correspondence with your father, arranging for you to be introduced to Kael exactly 3 weeks after his father's death, when he was vulnerable, grieving, easy to manipulate. That's not— Seraphine started. There are detailed instructions here, how to position yourself as the strong, practical choice, how to undermine the sacred bond between Kael and his Luna, how to make him think rejecting tradition was his idea when really it was yours. She looked at Kael. You thought you were being revolutionary. You were being played. Kael's eyes found Seraphine, and something in his expression made her take a step back. Tell me she's lying, he said, his voice dangerously soft. Seraphine lifted her chin. Does it matter? We could be good together. We could rule. Tell me you weren't planted in my life by the same people who helped my father commit genocide. The silence stretched like wire pulled too tight. I was following orders, Seraphine said finally. But that doesn't mean my feelings weren't real. I do care about you, Kael. I can help you survive this. Survive? Kael laughed, a sound with no humor in it. I'm the son of a mass murderer sitting on a stolen throne, surrounded by councilmen who orchestrated the whole thing so they could control me like a puppet. What exactly am I surviving for? For the Empire, Lord Cedric said, and his voice had lost all pretense of warmth. For stability. For the future. Yes, your father took the throne through violence. Yes, we helped him. Because King Aldrich was weak and sentimental and would have destroyed everything our kind built through his incompetence. So you murdered children, Marcus Thornclaw said, his voice shaking with rage. You butchered a 16-year-old girl and a 9-year-old child in their beds and called it necessity. It was necessity. Cedric's eyes were cold as winter. Aldrich had no sons. His eldest daughter was promised to a weak alpha from the Western Territories who would have fractured the empire within a generation. We needed strength. We needed someone who understood that power requires sacrifice. You needed a puppet. Garrett stepped forward, his massive frame radiating violence. You needed someone you could control. And when Kael here started showing signs of thinking for himself, you brought in this one, he jerked his head toward Seraphine, to keep him on a leash. The hall was moving now, alphas choosing sides, hands reaching for weapons that weren't supposed to be present at a formal gathering, but always were. The old families gravitating towards Selene and the northern wolves, the younger ambitious packs clustering near Kyle and the council, the empire splitting down the middle like ice under pressure. Kyle stood at the center of it all, looking lost, looking like what he was, a young king who'd just discovered everything he believed was a lie. Selene felt the bond between them pulse sharp and painful. She could feel his devastation, his rage, his desperate need for something solid to stand on while his world collapsed. For a moment, she almost went to him, almost reached out and told him they could fix this together. Then Seraphine moved. It happened fast. 1 second she was standing still, the next her hand flashed to a hidden knife at her thigh, and she was driving it toward Celine's throat with the speed and precision of someone who'd been trained to kill. Selene twisted, the blade missing her neck by inches, slicing across her shoulder instead. Pain exploded white-hot, but she kept moving, her own knife, the old king's knife that Garrett had given her, appearing in her hand like it had always been there. They crashed together in a tangle of limbs and steel. Seraphine fought like a professional, all technique and efficiency. Selene fought like someone who'd spent the last month training with wolves who'd survived 30 years in the wilderness on rage and skill. The hall erupted into chaos. Wolves shifted, claws and fangs replacing human features. The old families surged forward to defend Selene. Council-allied packs moved to protect Seraphine and Cedric. Kael's voice boomed out, Alpha Command rolling through the space like thunder. Stop! Some wolves froze. Others ignored him entirely, too far gone in battle fury to recognize authority. Selene and Seraphine circled each other, both bleeding now. Seraphine's dress was torn, her perfect hair wild. Selene's shoulder wound was soaking her coat with blood, but she barely felt it through the adrenaline. You could have had everything, Seraphine hissed. You could have been queen, accepted the arrangement, shared power. Instead, you chose pride. I chose truth. Selene feinted left, drove right, her blade opening a line across Seraphine's ribs. And you chose to be a tool for old men who see everyone as pieces on a board. Better a tool that survives than a martyr who burns. Seraphine lunged, impossibly fast. Selene tried to dodge, but her foot slipped in blood, and suddenly Seraphine's knife was driving toward her heart, and there was no time to block, no space to move. Kael hit Seraphine like a freight train, his shifted wolf form massive and gray and absolutely murderous. They went down in a tangle, Seraphine screaming, Kael's jaws closing around her knife arm. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the hall. Kael shifted back to human, kneeling over Seraphine with his hand around her throat. His eyes were wild, more animal than man. You tried to kill her, he said, and his voice didn't sound human. You tried to kill my mate. Former mate, Seraphine choked out. You rejected her, remember? Kael's hand tightened. I'm reconsidering. Lord Cedric's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Your Majesty, step away from her. This is not the time for emotional decisions. Kael looked up, and what Selene saw in his face made her blood run cold. It was his father's expression. The same cold calculation she'd seen in old portraits, the same ruthless weighing of costs and benefits. You're right, Kael said quietly. This isn't the time for emotion. He stood, leaving Seraphine gasping on the floor. He walked towards Cedric with the slow, deliberate movements of a predator who'd already decided his prey was dead. You used my father, Kael said. You used me. You've been using everyone in this room for 30 years, moving us around like we're nothing but resources to be exploited. That's what leadership is, Cedric said calmly, making difficult choices, using assets strategically. Your father understood that. I'd hoped you would too. Kael stopped 3 feet away. Oh, I understand. I understand that you're a cancer that's been eating this empire from the inside. I understand that you murdered children to gain power and manipulated me to keep it. He smiled, and it was the coldest thing Celine had ever seen. I understand exactly what needs to happen next. The council guards moved to surround Cedric, but Kael's own royal guard countered, weapons drawn. The entire hall was a powder keg waiting for a spark. You can't kill me, Cedric said, but there was fear in his eyes now. I have allies, supporters in every territory. You move against me, you'll tear the empire apart. It's already torn apart. Kael looked around the hall at the wolves divided into armed camps, at the blood on the floor, at the evidence scattered like accusations. You did that. You and my father, and everyone who decided that power was worth any price. Then fix it, Celine said quietly. Kael turned to look at her, and the bond between them pulled tight enough to hurt. How? He asked, and he sounded lost. How do I fix what my father broke? How do I lead an empire built on murdered children? You start by telling the truth. Celine walked toward him, ignoring the way every weapon in the hall tracked her movement. You acknowledge what happened. You expose everyone who was involved. You let the families choose whether to follow you or execute you. That's suicide. Maybe. Celine stopped close enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of a crown that had never fit right. But it's honest, and it's the only way forward that doesn't make you exactly what your father was. Kael stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to address the hall, his voice carrying to every corner. My father, Elias Draven, murdered King Aldrich Ravenshield and his entire family 30 years ago. He did it with the help of Lord Cedric Ashbourne and 6 other council members whose names I will provide. He did it to seize power, and I have benefited from that power my entire life. The hall went silent. I didn't know, Kael continued, but ignorance isn't innocence. I sit on a throne purchased with the blood of children. I rejected my true mate for a woman planted in my life by the same people who orchestrated genocide. I've been a fool and a puppet and everything Celine accused me of being. His voice hardened. But I'm done being controlled. Effective immediately, I'm dissolving the High Council. Every member who participated in the coup will be tried for their crimes. Every family who suffered will be heard. And if the verdict is that I should pay for my father's sins with my life, he pulled the crown from his head and threw it on the floor between them. Then that's justice too. The crown rolled across blood-slicked marble and stopped at Celine's feet. Lord Cedric's face twisted with rage. You stupid boy! You think honor will save you? You think admitting guilt makes you noble? You've just signed your own execution order. Then you'll have to execute half this empire. Marcus Thornclaw stepped forward. Because I stand with him, as do I. Vera Nightshade joined him. And I, Johann Ironclaw. One by one, the old family alphas moved to stand beside Kael. Not behind him. Beside him. Equals facing judgment together. The council-allied packs hesitated, looking at each other, weighing odds and alliances. Then a younger alpha, one Celine recognized as being firmly in the council's pocket, did something unexpected. He walked across the hall and stood with the old families. My father was killed for questioning the Draven rise to power, he said quietly. I was told it was an accident. I don't want to serve people who kill to hide truth. Another joined him, then another. Cedric watched his coalition crumble, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. If I'm going to burn, he said softly, I'm taking all of you with me. He pulled a device from his coat pocket, small, metal, covered in runes that pulsed with sick green light. Celine's blood went cold. That's dark magic. That's forbidden. Forbidden by laws I helped write. Cedric's smile was insane. This is insurance, a weapon I've had prepared for years in case the Empire ever turned against me. He held it up. Everyone in this hall is now marked. If I die, you all die. If I'm imprisoned, you suffer. The only way anyone survives is if you let me walk out of here, give me control of the Northern Territories, and never speak of this again. The hall erupted in fury and fear. Wolves surged toward Cedric, but his guards formed a wall and the device in his hand pulsed brighter. "Don't test me," Cedric said. "I've already triggered the marking. It's in your blood now, all of you." Celine felt it then, a wrongness crawling under her skin, foreign and toxic. Around the hall, other wolves were touching their arms, their necks, feeling the same corruption spreading. "You're bluffing," Garrett snarled. "Am I?" Cedric looked at one of his own guards. "Kill yourself." The guard's eyes went wide with horror. His hand moved to his own throat without his consent, claws extending. He tried to fight it, muscles straining, but his own hand closed around his windpipe and squeezed. The guard dropped, choking, dying. The hall froze in absolute horror. "So," Cedric said pleasantly, "who'd like to negotiate terms?" Kale looked at Celine, and she saw her own desperation reflected in his eyes. They'd exposed the truth. They'd united the Empire against corruption, and they'd walked straight into a trap that would kill them all if they didn't surrender everything they'd fought for. Celine's hand moved to the old king's knife at her belt, the blade that had never tasted innocent blood. She looked at Cedric, at the device pulsing with dark magic, at 300 wolves marked for death. She thought about her mother, who'd died trusting the wrong person, about the royal children butchered in their beds, about every choice that had led to this moment. Then she made a decision that would change everything. "I'll do it," she said quietly. Every eye turned to her. "Let everyone else go. Remove the mark. And I'll do whatever you want." "No," Kael started, but Selene cut him off with a look. She kept her eyes on Cedric. "You want leverage over the Empire? You want insurance?" "I'm the sacred Luna, the symbol of tradition, the woman who exposed your crimes." She smiled coldly. "I'm worth more to you as a hostage than all of them combined." Cedric studied her, calculating. "You'd sacrifice yourself? For them? For him?" He gestured at Kael. "The man who rejected you in front of the entire Empire? I'd sacrifice myself for the truth." Celine's voice was steady. "Something you wouldn't understand." The silence stretched like wire. Then Cedric smiled. Accepted. He raised the device. "Release." Celine's knife left her hand before he could finish the word. It flew true and perfect. 30 years of waiting for this exact moment, blessed by a murdered king and guided by pure righteous fury. The blade buried itself in Cedric's throat. His eyes went wide with shock. The device fell from his hands, and Celine realized with horror that she'd just killed the only person who could remove the death mark from their blood. The device hit the ground and shattered, green light exploding outward like shrapnel. Every wolf in the hall screamed as the marking ignited, burning through blood and bone and soul. Celine felt her own body catch fire from the inside, pain like nothing she'd ever imagined, and her last thought before the darkness took her was that she'd saved them all, or killed them all, and she'd never know which. Pain was a living thing inside Celine's body, burning through her veins like acid, and for a moment she thought death would be a mercy compared to this. Then the burning stopped, not gradually, not fading into manageable agony, just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch, and Celine gasped air into lungs that felt like they'd been shredded from the inside. Around her, 300 wolves were doing the same, gasping, choking, coming back from the edge of death with the desperate confusion of people who'd been certain they were already gone. Celine forced her eyes open. The hall was chaos. Bodies on the floor, some moving, some terrifyingly still, blood everywhere. The shattered remains of Cedric's device scattered across marble like cursed shrapnel, and Cedric himself dead on the platform with her knife still buried in his throat, his eyes staring at nothing. She'd killed him, killed the one person who could have removed the mark safely. She'd traded certain slavery for possible death, and now they were alive. How? The word came out raw, her throat damaged from screaming. "How are we alive?" Kael was on his knees 10 feet away, blood running from his nose and ears, his hands shaking. He looked at her with eyes that had seen things no one should see. "The bond," he said, his voice wrecked. "When the device broke, when the magic tried to kill us, I felt you dying through the bond. Felt everyone dying, and I just..." He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Celine understood. An alpha's command was more than just voice and dominance. It was will made manifest. and Kael had commanded them all to live with every ounce of power in his blood, throwing himself between 300 wolves and death itself. It should have killed him. The cost of that kind of working, the sheer force required, it should have burned him out from the inside. But he was still breathing, still conscious. And around them, wolves were starting to move, starting to understand that they'd survived something impossible. "You saved us," Marcus Thornclaw said, pulling himself upright with visible effort. "Your Majesty, you saved us all." Kael shook his head, still staring at Celine. "She saved us. If she hadn't killed Cedric when she did, he would have completed the binding. We'd all be his puppets right now." He pushed himself to his feet, swaying. "She traded everything on a knife throw and perfect timing." "I traded everything on you," Celine said quietly. "On the bond. On the chance that you'd fight to keep me alive, even when you had every reason to let me die." The hall had gone silent again, every wolf watching them. The rejected king and the cast-out Luna, standing in the wreckage of an empire, bound by a connection that should have been severed but had instead become the thing that saved them all. Kyle took a step toward her, then another. The distance between them felt infinite and non-existent all at once. "I was wrong," he said, and his voice carried through the absolute silence. "I was wrong about everything. About what makes a king strong. About what traditions mean. About you." "Don't," Celine said, but there was no force behind it. "I didn't do this for forgiveness." "I know." Kael stopped close enough that she could see the burst blood vessels in his eyes, the price he'd paid to keep them all alive. "You did it for truth, for justice, for people you don't even know who died 30 years before you were born. That's what a real Luna does, what a real ruler does." He went to one knee in front of her, in front of the entire gathering, and every wolf in the hall understood the significance. A king kneeling, an alpha submitting, a public acknowledgement that he'd been wrong and she'd been right and nothing would ever be the same. "I'm asking you to forgive me anyway," Kael said. "Not because I deserve it, because the Empire needs you. I need you." The hall held its breath. Celine looked down at him, this man who'd destroyed her publicly, who'd chosen ambition over sacred bonds, who'd been so certain he knew better than centuries of tradition. She saw exhaustion in his face, saw genuine regret, saw the boy she'd grown up with buried under the weight of his father's sins. She also saw the king he could become if someone kept him honest, kept him grounded, kept him from turning into the monster his bloodline suggested was inevitable. "Stand up," she said quietly. Kael rose slowly, uncertainty written across his features. Celine reached down and picked up the crown he'd thrown to the floor hours ago. It was dented now, tarnished with blood, but still unmistakably the symbol of royal power. "You want me to forgive you?" she said. "You want me to stand beside you as Luna and help you rebuild this broken empire?" "Yes." "Then understand this. I'm not the woman who left the coronation in silence. I'm not going to smile and defer and let you make decisions while I stand in your shadow." She held the crown between them like a challenge. "If I accept this bond again, I'm your equal, your partner in every decision. And the second you forget that, the second you think your word matters more than mine because you wear this crown, I'll walk away again. And this time I'll burn it all down on my way out." The threat hung in the air, sharp and real. Then Kael did something that made every traditional alpha in the hall suck in a shocked breath. He took the crown from her hands and broke it. Not carefully, not symbolically. He gripped it with both hands and bent the metal until it snapped, the ancient craftsmanship of 3 centuries yielding to raw strength and absolute conviction. "No more false thrones," he said, holding the broken halves. "No more symbols purchased with blood. If we're rebuilding this empire, we're doing it from the foundation up." He looked around the hall at the assembled alphas. New laws, new leadership, new traditions that actually serve our people instead of just concentrating power. He turned back to Celine. "And if you're willing to help me do that, I don't need you as a decoration. I need you as a weapon, as a conscience, as the one person in this empire I know will cut me down the second I start turning into my father." Celine studied him for a long moment. Then she reached out and took one half of the broken crown. "Deal, but we're not calling it King and Luna anymore. That old system got us here. We need something new. What did you have in mind? Co-rulers, equal authority. Either of us can make decisions, but major changes require both our approval." She looked at the gathered alphas. And we establish a proper council, not puppeteers hiding in shadows. Real advisors with real power who can check us if we overstep. That's insane, an older alpha said from the back. Dividing royal authority like that? The Empire will tear itself apart within a year. Then it deserves to tear apart, Garrett Ironpaw said, stepping forward. Better an honest collapse than a stable tyranny. The old way gave us King Aldrich's murder and 30 years of lies. Maybe it's time to try something that doesn't end in massacred children. The hall stirred, wolves exchanging glances, the weight of change pressing down on all of them. Then Vera Nightshade spoke up, her voice clear and firm. I support the motion, equal rule, transparent council, new foundations. As do I, Marcus added. One by one, the old family alphas pledged their support. Then the younger wolves who'd crossed the hall during the confrontation. Then, surprisingly, some of the council allied packs who'd been watching which way the wind was blowing. But not all of them. A group of maybe 40 wolves, led by Seraphine, who'd pulled herself upright despite her broken arm, stood apart, cold-eyed and calculating. You're making a mistake, Seraphine said, her voice tight with pain and rage. The Empire needs strength, not sentiment. It needs a ruler who understands that hard choices require hard hearts. Then go find one, Kyle said flatly. Because I'm done pretending that cruelty equals strength. Seraphine's laugh was bitter. You'll regret this. All of you will. When the territories start rebelling because they see weakness at the top, when rival empires sense opportunity, you'll wish you'd kept the old ways. Maybe, Celine said. Or maybe we'll build something actually worth protecting instead of a system that only survives through fear and lies. She met Seraphine's gaze without flinching. You're free to leave. Take anyone who agrees with you. But understand that if you move against us, if you try to undermine what we're building, I won't hesitate like I did with Cedric. Next time, I'll make sure the job is finished before you hit the ground. The threat was clear, absolute. Seraphine stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, her group of loyalists following. About 40 wolves total. Not enough to pose an immediate military threat, but enough to cause problems down the road. Kyle watched them go. Should we stop them? No, Celine said. Let them leave. We can't build a new empire by forcing everyone to participate. Some people will never accept change. Better to know who they are now than discover it when they're plotting in secret. The massive doors closed behind Seraphine's faction with a finality that felt like the end of an era. Kale turned to address the remaining wolves, maybe 260 still in the hall. We have a lot of work ahead of us, he said. Trials for the surviving council members who participated in the coup. Reparations for the families who suffered. Completely restructuring how power flows through the empire. It's going to be brutal and messy, and some of you will hate me before we're done. He paused. But I'm asking you to give this a chance. Give us a chance. Help us build something that doesn't require murder to maintain itself. The response wasn't overwhelming enthusiasm. It was exhausted acceptance. Grim determination. The kind of support that comes from people who've just survived a near-death experience and are too tired to argue with whoever's offering to lead them somewhere safer. It would have to be enough. Over the next 3 days, the Empire convulsed like a dying thing being reborn. The trials started immediately. 5 surviving council members who'd been part of the original coup. Their testimony, extracted under oath and Alpha Command, filled in the gaps of the historical record. The planning that had gone into the massacre, the cleanup afterward, the systematic elimination of anyone who'd asked too many questions. 2 of them broke down completely, begging for mercy. 2 maintained that they'd done what was necessary for the Empire's survival. 1 stayed silent until the verdict was announced, then tried to attack Kyle and was killed by Garrett before getting within 10 feet of the platform. The sentences were harsh. Execution for 3. Life imprisonment for 2. Confiscation of all family assets and territories. Some of the old families wanted harsher punishments. Torture, public humiliation, the kind of vengeance that would match the crime. Kyle refused. We punish the guilty, he said during one particularly heated council session. We don't become them. Several alphas walked out. Several more grumbled but stayed. And Celine watched Kyle hold the line between justice and vengeance with a determination that reminded her why the Bond had chosen them in the first place. But the trials were the easy part. The hard part was the territories. News of the coup revelation and the imperial restructuring spread through the empire like wildfire. Some regions celebrated, others panicked. A few, particularly those that had benefited from the Draven regime, started making noises about secession. The Eastern Valleys declared independence on day 4. Just announced they were leaving the empire, establishing their own sovereignty, and anyone who tried to stop them would be met with military force. Kyle wanted to send troops immediately, crush the rebellion before it spread. Celine stopped him with a hand on his arm. "You send an army," she said quietly. "You prove Seraphine right. You prove that the new empire is just the old empire with different faces. Then what do I do? Let them leave? Let the whole thing fall apart? You go talk to them." Kale stared at her. "Just walk into a hostile territory and negotiate? You walk into a hostile territory with me, Garrett, Marcus, and 50 of our best diplomats and fighters. You acknowledge their grievances. You offer them real autonomy within the empire instead of the puppet governance they had before. And if they still want to leave, we let them leave," Kyle finished, "and hope it doesn't start a domino effect. That's leadership," Celine said, "making the hard call and living with the consequences." So they went. The journey to the Eastern Valleys took 2 days. Every mile, Kyle expected ambush, expected assassins or armies or some final treachery from Seraphine's faction that had disappeared into the countryside. Instead, they found villages watching them pass with wary eyes. Farmers and merchants and families who just wanted stability and safety and some assurance that their lives wouldn't be upended by another round of political chaos. The Eastern Valley's leadership met them in a fortified compound, surrounded by their own guards, ready for violence. Kyle didn't give them violence. He gave them honesty. "My father built his reign on lies and murder," he said, standing in their council chamber with no crown and no throne. "I inherited that legacy without knowing its true cost. Now I do. And I'm trying to build something different, something that doesn't require you to submit out of fear." He laid out the new structure. Regional autonomy. Local leaders with real authority instead of appointed puppets. Fair taxation instead of tribute that enriched the capital. Transparent laws instead of royal decrees that changed with the king's mood. It sounded too good to be true. The Eastern Valley Alphas said exactly that. "So put it in writing," Celine said. "Make it a treaty. If we violate the terms, you have grounds to leave with the Empire's blessing. If you violate the terms, we have grounds to enforce consequences. Either way, there's a structure that protects both sides." The negotiations took another 3 days. Brutal, exhausting, every clause fought over like it was life or death. Because it was. The Empire's future, fragile as new ice, depended on whether they could find a middle ground between total control and complete chaos. They found it. Barely. The Eastern Valleys agreed to remain part of the Empire under the new terms. Other regions, seeing that rebellion could actually lead to better conditions, started sending their own delegations to negotiate similar arrangements. Within 2 weeks, the map of the empire had been redrawn, not through conquest but through conversation, not through force but through compromise. It was messy and imperfect, and some territories still refused to participate, but it was also the first time in 3 generations that the empire had grown through anything other than violence. Kyle and Celine returned to the capital exhausted. They'd been sleeping maybe 3 hours a night, running on adrenaline and desperation, trying to hold together an empire that wanted to fly apart. The palace felt different now. Colder. Less certain. The servants who remained, many had fled when the coup revelation broke, moved through the halls like ghosts, unsure whether they served the future or the past. Celine found Kyle in his father's old study late one night, surrounded by papers, his eyes red from exhaustion. "You need to sleep," she said. "I need to finish the territorial agreements. I need to review the military restructuring. You need to sleep." Kyle looked up at her, and the exhaustion in his face went bone deep. "What if I can't do this?" he asked quietly. "What if I'm too broken by what my father was to be anything different?" "Then you'll fail." Celine sat across from him. "And we'll find someone else to lead, but you won't know until you try. And trying requires being alive and functional, which means sleep." She pulled the papers out of his hands despite his weak protest. "Come on. You've held the empire together for 2 weeks while it was actively trying to tear itself apart. You can take 6 hours to rest. Kale let her lead him to his chambers. The royal bed was massive and empty, and designed for someone more certain of their right to occupy it. "Stay," he said as she turned to leave. Celine paused. "That's not appropriate. We're co-rulers, I'm not asking you to share my bed. I'm asking you to stay in the room. Because when I close my eyes, I see my father's face. I see Cedric's device exploding. I see 300 wolves dying, and I don't want to be alone with that." The vulnerability in his voice was absolute. Celine could have refused, could have maintained the professional distance they'd been carefully preserving while the Empire watched their every interaction. Instead, she pulled a chair next to the bed and sat. 6 hours, she said. Then we're back to saving the Empire. Kael's eyes were already closing. Thank you. He was asleep within minutes, his breathing evening out into something that looked almost peaceful. Celine sat in the darkness and felt the bond between them pulse steady and warm. It was different than before, damaged by his rejection, scarred by everything they'd been through, but still there. Still connecting them in ways that terrified and comforted her in equal measure. A soft knock on the door made her tense. Her hand went to the knife at her belt. She was never unarmed anymore, before she recognized Elena's scarred face peering through the crack. "We have a problem," Elena whispered. Celine slipped out into the hallway, closing the door quietly behind her. What kind of problem? The kind where Seraphine didn't disappear into exile like everyone assumed. Elena's expression was grim. She's been gathering forces. Disgruntled nobles, traditionalists who hate the new structure, mercenaries from outside the Empire who don't care about politics. Just payment. How many? Our scouts estimate 300, maybe more. She's built an army in 2 weeks. Celine's blood went cold. Where? Northern Territories. The old Draven family compound that Kael's father abandoned after the coup. She handed Celine a map marked with positions. She's fortified it. She's arming them. And she's spreading propaganda that Kael has gone weak, that the Empire is vulnerable, that anyone with strength should challenge him now while the throne is unstable. This is what she wanted all along, Celine said quietly. She didn't walk away in defeat. She walked away to regroup, and now she's ready to make her move. Elena's eyes were hard. The question is whether we're ready to meet her. Celine looked at the closed door where Kael was sleeping, probably for the first time in days. She thought about the fragile empire they'd been trying to rebuild, about the territories that had only just agreed to stay because they believed the new leadership would be different from the old. If they ignored this threat, if they let Seraphine build strength unchecked, it would be the Draven coup all over again. Violence and betrayal rewarded with power. But if they went to war, if they mobilized the Empire's forces to crush Seraphine's rebellion, it would prove that nothing had really changed. That power still flowed from the blade, not the ballot. There had to be another way. There had to be. Celine looked at Elena with sudden, terrible clarity. How loyal are the Northern Wolves to our cause? Loyal enough to die for it, Elena said without hesitation. We've been waiting 30 years for a chance to make things right. We're not stopping now. Good. Because I'm going to need them to do something insane. Elena's scarred mouth curved into a smile. My favorite kind of assignment. They spent the rest of the night planning. By the time dawn broke, Celine had a strategy that was equal parts brilliant and suicidal. She woke Kael with a hand on his shoulder. His eyes snapped open, instantly alert, the reflexes of someone who'd learned that sleep was never truly safe. We need to move, she said. Seraphine's built an army and she's coming for the throne. Kael was on his feet in seconds, pulling on clothes and weapons with practiced efficiency. How long do we have? Maybe a week before she feels strong enough to march. Maybe less if she hears we know about her plans. Then we mobilize the Empire forces. Full military response. No. Kael stopped. What? We don't mobilize. We don't meet her with an army. We meet her with me. Absolutely not. Listen, Celine said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her gut. Every move we've made since the gathering has been about changing how power works in this empire, about showing that strength isn't just military might. If we crush Seraphine with overwhelming force, we're just proving her point that nothing's really changed. So what's your alternative? You walk into her compound alone and ask nicely for her to surrender? Close. I walk in with a small group, 50 northern wolves, and I challenge her to single combat for the right to lead the opposition. That's suicide. She's been training as a warrior since childhood. She'll kill you. Maybe. Celine met his gaze. But if I win, her army loses its leader and its legitimacy. If I lose, you've still got the imperial forces and the moral high ground of having tried diplomacy first. I can't let you do this. You don't get to let me do anything. We're equals, remember? This is my call. The bond between them pulled tight, and Celine felt his fear and fury and desperate desire to protect her burning through the connection. Don't ask me to watch you die, Kael said, and his voice broke on the words. I'm not asking. I'm telling you this is what's happening. She stepped closer, close enough that she could see the pulse hammering in his throat. You taught me that being a ruler means making hard choices. This is mine. Then I'm coming with you. No. You're staying here and holding the empire together. Because if this goes wrong, if I don't come back, someone needs to be here who understands what we were trying to build. Kael's hands clenched into fists, every muscle in his body screaming to fight this, to override her decision with his own. But he didn't, because that would make him exactly what his father was. Instead, he pulled her close and kissed her. It was desperate and furious and tasted like grief and goodbye. You come back, he said against her mouth. You hear me? You come back or I swear I'll tear apart whatever's left of this empire looking for you. I'll do my best. She pulled away before she could change her mind, before the fear could override her conviction. Elena was waiting in the hallway with 50 of the hardest, most dangerous wolves Celine had ever seen. Northern veterans who'd survived 30 years of exile through sheer stubbornness and rage. Ready? Elena asked. No, but let's go anyway. They left at dawn, running north in wolf form, covering ground fast. The journey that had taken Celine days when she'd first fled now took less than 24 hours with a full pack pushing the pace. The old Draven compound came into view just as the sun was setting. It was massive, built like a fortress, designed to withstand siege. Seraphine's banner flew from the walls, a blood-red wolf on a black field. The symbolism was clear, the old ways, the old strength, everything Kael and Celine were trying to move away from. Celine shifted to human form at the tree line, accepting clothes and weapons from her pack. The old king's knife sat heavy at her belt, a reminder of everything she was fighting for. I'm going in alone first, she said, to make the challenge official. Like hell, Garrett growled. That's how you get assassinated. Maybe. But it's also how I show I'm not afraid. That the new empire stands on principle, not paranoia. You're a stubborn woman, Garrett said, but there was respect in his voice. I learned from the best. Celine walked toward the compound gates. They opened before she reached them, and Seraphine stepped out flanked by guards. She'd changed in 2 weeks. Harder. Colder. Her broken arm had healed, but the scar remained visible, a reminder of what Kael had done to her. Come to beg for mercy, Seraphine called out. Come to offer you one last chance, Celine called back. Surrender now, disband your forces, accept amnesty, and you can live out your life in peace. Seraphine laughed. Peace under your new empire? Under Kael's weak leadership? I'd rather die. That can be arranged. Celine stopped 10 feet from Seraphine, close enough to see the hatred in her eyes. Close enough to Single combat, Celine said. You and me. Winner takes leadership of your forces. Loser doesn't walk away. Seraphine's smile was vicious. You think you can beat me? You're the rejected Luna who spent her life following rules while I trained to break them. Guess we'll find out. The challenge hung between them, witnessed by hundreds of wolves on both sides. Seraphine could have refused, could have ordered her guards to kill Celine where she stood. Instead, she nodded. At dawn, in the old training grounds. No interference, no mercy. See you then. Celine turned and walked back to her pack, feeling Seraphine's eyes on her back like knives. Elena met her at the tree line. You just bet everything on a fight you might not win. I know, that's insane. Yeah. Celine looked at the compound, at the army that would scatter or consolidate depending on the next morning's outcome. But it's also the only move that doesn't make us exactly what we're fighting against. That night, Celine couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire with the northern wolves, listening to their stories of the old empire, of King Aldrich, who'd been kind and fair and died for it. He used to say, Elena told her, voice rough with memory, that strength without honor is just violence wearing a crown. Your Kyle is learning that lesson the hard way. Is he, though? Celine asked. Or is he just scared enough to listen because he knows what happens if he doesn't? Does it matter? Elena's pale eyes reflected firelight. Fear can teach just as well as wisdom, sometimes better. Dawn came too fast and too slow simultaneously. Celine stripped down to fighting clothes. Lightweight, minimal protection, maximum mobility. The old king's knife at her belt and nothing else. The northern wolves walked with her to the training grounds. On the other side, Seraphine's army assembled. Maybe 300 strong, all watching to see if their leader could back up her claims of strength. Seraphine entered the circle stripped down similarly, twin knives in her hands, her body showing the lean muscle of someone who'd spent a lifetime preparing for violence. The rules were simple. Fight until one of them couldn't continue. No outside interference. Death was permitted, but not required. Celine and Seraphine circled each other as the sun broke over the horizon, painting everything gold and red. You know you can't win this, Seraphine said. You're too soft, too sentimental. I'm alive, Celine said. Cedric's dead, so's your whole conspiracy. Who's soft? They came together like colliding storms. Seraphine was fast and technical, every move precise and calculated. Celine was raw and desperate, fighting with the knowledge that losing meant everything she'd built would crumble. They traded cuts and blocks, blood starting to flow, neither gaining clear advantage. Seraphine drove her blade towards Celine's ribs. Celine twisted, felt steel kiss her skin, but not bite deep, and brought her own knife up in a slash that opened Seraphine's shoulder. They broke apart, circling again, both breathing hard. You fight well for someone who spent her life being ignored, Seraphine panted. You'd be surprised what you learn when people underestimate you, Celine said. They crashed together again, and this time Seraphine's blade found meat, sliding between Celine's ribs on the left side. Pain exploded white-hot, but Celine turned into it instead of away, trapping Seraphine's knife hand against her own body and driving the old king's blade towards Seraphine's throat. Seraphine blocked with her free hand, steel meeting steel, their faces inches apart. You're dying, Seraphine hissed. That wound is fatal if you don't get it treated in the next 10 minutes. Then I better finish this fast. Celine head-butted Seraphine, felt cartilage crunch, and in the split second of shock, she ripped Seraphine's trapped knife free from her ribs and threw it away. They went to the ground in a tangle, Celine's blood making everything slippery, both fighting for position with raw desperation. Celine got on top, got her blade to Seraphine's throat, pressed down just enough to draw blood. Yield, she gasped. Seraphine's eyes were wild, feral, everything civilization had tried to hide behind beauty and training. Never. Then die knowing you lost to someone you thought was weak. But Celine didn't press down, didn't kill. Instead, she stood, swaying, the wound in her side pumping blood that she couldn't afford to lose. I'm giving you a choice, she said loud enough for both armies to hear. Yield and live, continue and die. What's it going to be? Seraphine lay in the dirt, blood and defeat written across her face. For a long moment, Celine thought she'd choose death out of spite. Then Seraphine's eyes found something over Celine's shoulder, and her expression changed to something like fear. Celine turned. Kyle stood at the edge of the training ground, and he wasn't alone. Behind him, 1,000 Imperial wolves assembled in perfect formation, and at his side stood the one thing Celine never expected to see. A woman who looked exactly like the portraits of Princess Elena, the 9-year-old who supposedly died in the coup 30 years ago. Except she was alive, and she was wearing a crown that made Kyle's broken symbol look like a child's toy. The rightful heir to the throne had returned, and everything Celine thought she knew about the Empire's future shattered like glass. Celine's blood was soaking into the dirt beneath her feet, the wound in her side screaming with every breath, but none of that mattered compared to the impossibility standing at the edge of the training ground. Princess Elena, 9 years old in the history books, dead in the official records, very much alive and 39 years old in reality. wearing a crown that carried the weight of legitimate royal blood that the Draven line had never possessed. The silence was total. 300 of Seraphine's wolves, 50 of Seleni's northern fighters, 1,000 Imperial forces behind Kael, all of them frozen by the same realization that everything they thought they knew about the Empire's foundation had just shifted again. Kael's face was unreadable, but Selene felt confusion and shock pulsing through the bond between them. He hadn't known. Whatever this was, whoever had orchestrated this moment, they'd kept it from him too. The woman who called herself Princess Elena walked forward with the careful grace of someone who'd spent decades learning to move without drawing attention. She was small, unremarkable in features except for her eyes, those pale gray eyes that Selene had seen in the northern camp, in the scarred face of the woman who'd trained her. Elena Korvath wasn't just the captain of the royal guard who'd survived. She was the princess herself. The deception settled over Selene like ice water. Every conversation, every training session, every moment the woman had pushed her harder, demanded more, spoken of the murdered royal family like she was separate from them. It had all been a carefully maintained lie. "You," Selene said, her voice raw. "You were her. This whole time." The woman who'd been calling herself Elena Korvath stopped 10 feet away. "The real captain died protecting me that night. Took a blade meant for my heart. With her last breath, she told me to take her name, to hide, to survive. So I did." Her eyes swept across the assembled armies. "I was 9 years old when Elias Draven murdered my father and both my siblings. I watched my sister Liana beg for my life before they cut her down. I hid in the servants' quarters for 3 days while they hunted survivors. And when I finally escaped, I was too young, too traumatized, too powerless to do anything but run." She turned to look at Kael, and the weight of 30 years of grief and rage was written across her face. "So I ran north. I found other survivors. And I spent 3 decades building strength, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to take back what was stolen from my family." Kael's hands clenched at his sides. The bond between him and Selene was screaming with tension, with the understanding that they'd been pieces on a board they didn't even know existed. "You used us," Kael said quietly. "All of this. Selene's investigation, the gathering, the revelation, you orchestrated it. I provided opportunities." Elena's voice was steady. "Selene made her own choices. So did you. I simply ensured that the truth had a chance to surface when the Empire was ready to hear it." "Ready," Garrett Ironpaw said, and his voice carried betrayal like a wound. "We've been following you for 30 years, fighting for you, dying for you, and you never told us who you really were. Because the moment I revealed myself, I became a target." Elena looked at the massive warrior without flinching. "Elias Draven spent years hunting for surviving royal blood. If he'd known I was alive, he would have burned the northern territories to ash to find me. By staying hidden, by being just another vengeful survivor, I kept all of you safe." "Safe," Selene spat, pressing her hand against the wound in her side that wouldn't stop bleeding. "Or controllable. Which was it really? Both." Elena's gaze settled on Selene with something that might have been respect or might have been calculation. "You were the perfect catalyst, the rejected Luna with everything to prove. Smart enough to find the truth, angry enough to weaponize it, connected enough to make the Empire listen. I gave you access to evidence, but you're the one who chose to use it." The words hit like physical blows because they were true. Selene had made every choice freely, driven by her own rage and sense of justice. The fact that someone else had been guiding those choices from the shadows didn't change the fundamental reality of her agency. But it made everything feel hollow anyway. "So what now?" Kael asked, and there was exhaustion in his voice that went soul deep. "You reveal yourself as the rightful heir. You take the throne. You execute me for the crimes of my father. Is that the plan?" Elena studied him for a long moment. "No." The single word rippled through the assembled wolves like electricity. "I didn't spend 30 years preparing to become another tyrant who rules through blood right alone." Elena's voice carried across the training ground with absolute authority. "I watched what you did at the gathering, watched you break your own crown, watched you acknowledge your father's crimes, and try to build something new from the ruins." She walked closer to Kael, and the 1,000 wolves at his back tensed. "You could have crushed the rebellious territories, could have held on to power through force and fear. Instead, You negotiated. You compromised. You treated your subjects like equals deserving of voice and choice. Her pale eyes held his. That's not the action of a man who deserves execution. That's the action of a king I can work with. Work with, Kael repeated slowly. Not replace. The Empire needs stability more than it needs vengeance. Elena looked around at the armies, at the wolves, watching this exchange with the intensity of people whose futures hung in the balance. I have the bloodline. You have the infrastructure and the loyalty of the Reformed Council. Celine has the respect of the old families and the moral authority of the wronged Luna. She spread her hands. So I'm proposing something that's never been done in our empire's history. A triumvirate. 3 rulers with equal authority. Royal blood, Reformed dynasty, and sacred bond, all working together to build something that doesn't collapse the moment one person dies or goes corrupt. The silence that followed was different than before. Not shock, consideration. The sound of hundreds of minds simultaneously trying to envision what that would look like. Seraphine laughed from where she still lay in the dirt, the sound bitter and broken. This is insane. 3 rulers? You'll tear each other apart within a year. Power doesn't share. It consumes. Elena looked down at her. Then we'll be the first to prove that wrong. Or we'll fail spectacularly, and the Empire will learn what doesn't work. Either way, it's better than repeating the same cycle of violence and betrayal that brought us here. She turned back to Kael and Celine. But I can't do this alone. I need both of you to choose this freely. No coercion, no obligation. Just 3 people who've all been broken by this empire's failures deciding to fix it together. Celine swayed, the blood loss finally catching up with her. Her vision blurred at the edges, and she felt the bond with Kael pulse sharp with alarm. Kael was at her side in seconds, his arm around her waist, supporting her weight. We need a healer, he snapped at the nearest wolves. Now! No, Celine said, forcing the words out through gritted teeth. Answer first. Are you willing to do this? Share power with the woman whose family your father destroyed? Kael looked at Elena, really looked, and Celine felt the war happening inside him through the bond. Pride, shame, hope, fear. The desperate desire to be something other than his bloodline suggested was possible. Yes, he said finally. If it means building something that doesn't require murder to maintain itself, yes. He looked down at Celine. What about you? Can you stand beside me after everything I did? After I rejected you, humiliated you, forced you into exile? Celine's laugh was weak but genuine. I've already proven I can stand beside you. The question is whether you can stand beside me as an equal instead of someone you think you need to protect or control. The bond between them pulled tight, and for a moment Celine could feel everything Kael felt. The love that had always been there, damaged but not destroyed by his choices. The guilt that ate at him every time he looked at her. The desperate hope that maybe, possibly, they could build something real from the wreckage. I can try, Kael said quietly. I can spend the rest of my life trying, if you'll let me. Then get me a healer before I bleed out, Celine said, because I'm not dying before I see how this insanity plays out. The healer was a small woman from the Northern Wolves, hands steady and competent as she worked on Celine's wound. The blade had missed anything immediately fatal, but the blood loss was severe and infection was a real risk. She worked while Elena addressed the assembled armies, laying out the structure of the new government. A triumvirate ruling council, regional autonomy with elected local leaders, transparent laws written by representatives from all territories, not just the capital, military restructuring to focus on defense rather than conquest. It was radical, unprecedented, the kind of thing that should have been met with immediate rebellion. Instead, wolves listened, argued, debated, but they listened. Seraphine's forces, leaderless and watching their champion defeated in honorable combat, slowly began to disperse. Some left entirely, unwilling to be part of whatever was being built. Others, hesitantly, started asking questions about the new structure. Seraphine herself was carried away under guard, her fate to be determined by the triumvirate once it was formally established. She didn't fight, didn't protest, just stared at Celine with an expression that might have been respect, or might have been hatred, or might have been both. The healer finished her work on Celine's wound and stepped back. You'll live. Rest for a week. No fighting, no shifting, just healing. Celine nodded her thanks, then forced herself to her feet despite the pain. Kael moved to support her, but she waved him off. I can stand on my own. I know, Kael said, but you don't have to. There was something in his voice that made Celine pause, something beyond guilt or obligation, something that felt like the boy she'd grown up with before crowns and ambition had twisted them both. She let him help her walk to where Elena was standing, watching the armies slowly reorganize themselves into something that looked less like opposing forces and more like an actual unified empire. This is going to be chaos, Celine said. Absolutely, Elena agreed. Power struggles, territory disputes, people testing boundaries constantly to see if we actually mean what we say about equality and transparency. She smiled, and it was the first genuine expression Celine had seen on her face since the revelation. But it'll be honest chaos, not corruption disguised as order, and that's worth something. The formal establishment of the triumvirate took another 3 weeks. 3 weeks of brutal negotiation, legal framework construction, and convincing skeptical territories that this wasn't just another power grab disguised as reform. The ceremony was nothing like Kael's coronation, no massive throne room, no thousands of nobles in silk and ceremony. Just a simple gathering in the palace's main hall, with representatives from every territory standing as witnesses. Elena, Kael, and Celine stood together on a platform that had been specifically built with 3 positions of equal height. No throne, no crown, just 3 people making a public commitment to share power and accountability. The oath they took was new, written collectively by legal scholars from across the empire. We swear to serve the empire and its people above personal ambition. We swear to rule with transparency and justice, not fear and deception. We swear to check each other's power, to question each other's decisions, and to step down if we betray the trust placed in us. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't inspiring. It was a legal contract made sacred by public witness and shared commitment. But when Celine spoke the words, feeling the bond with Kael pulse steady and warm, watching Elena's face show something like peace for the first time, it felt like truth. The celebration afterward was modest. No elaborate feast, no week-long parties, just a gathering where wolves from different territories mixed and talked and started the slow, difficult process of seeing each other as fellow citizens instead of potential enemies. Celine found herself on a balcony overlooking the palace grounds, alone for the first time in weeks. Her wound ached despite the healing, a reminder that victory always came with scars. Kael joined her, moving quietly, respecting the space until she acknowledged his presence with a slight nod. They stood in silence for a while, watching the empire they'd nearly destroyed and barely saved. "I'm sorry," Kael said finally, "for all of it, for choosing wrong, for hurting you, for making you fight so hard just to be seen." Celine didn't answer immediately. She was thinking about the coronation night, about walking out of that hall with her spine straight and her heart shattered, about the woman she'd been then and the woman she'd become in the months since. "I'm not," she said. Kael looked at her confused. "If you hadn't rejected me," Celine continued, "I never would have gone north, never would have found Elena, never would have discovered the truth about your father. We'd still be building a life on a foundation of lies, and eventually it would have collapsed anyway. So you're saying my betrayal was necessary? I'm saying pain teaches things that comfort never could." Celine finally looked at him. "I'm not grateful for what you did. I'll probably carry that wound for the rest of my life, but I'm also not the same person who would have stood silently in your shadow while you made decisions for both of us." She touched the scar on her side, feeling the raised tissue through her shirt. "I'm stronger now. Harder. Less willing to accept things just because tradition says they're right. And that person, the one who was forged in exile and rage and survival, that's who the empire needs beside you." Kael was quiet for a long moment. "The bond between us," he said. "It's different now." "Yes. Do you think it can ever be what it was supposed to be? What the moon intended?" Celine considered that. The sacred bond. The destined mate connection that was supposed to be unbreakable and perfect. "No," she said. "But maybe it can be something better. Something we chose instead of something that was chosen for us." She looked at him fully, seeing the exhaustion and hope and fear written across his face. "I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever completely, but I'm willing to see if we can build something real from what's left. Not because destiny says we should, because we're both committed to being better than we were." Kale's hand moved to hers, hesitant. She let him take it, feeling the familiar and foreign sensation of his touch. That's more than I deserve. Probably. But we're not doing this based on what you deserve. We're doing this based on what the Empire needs, and what I need. What do you need? A partner, Celine said. An equal. Someone who will challenge me when I'm wrong and stand beside me when I'm right. Can you be that? I can try. Kale's grip tightened slightly. It might take me the rest of my life to figure out how, but I can try. Then that's enough for now. They stood together in the darkness, two people broken by power and betrayal, trying to figure out if the pieces could fit together into something new. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way stories promised, but it was honest, and after everything they'd been through, honesty felt like its own kind of miracle. Over the next year, the Empire transformed in ways that were painful and necessary. Territories that had been ruled by appointed governors for generations elected their own leaders. Laws that had been written by council decree were rewritten through public debate and consensus. The military, bloated and aggressive under the Draven dynasty, was restructured into a smaller defensive force focused on protecting borders rather than expanding them. It was messy, chaotic. Every day brought new challenges, new disputes, new tests of whether the triumvirate could actually function as intended. Elena proved to be brilliant at strategy and long-term planning, her decades of survival having taught her to think in terms of years rather than moments. She handled territorial negotiations and diplomatic relations with other empires, using her royal bloodline to establish legitimacy that the Draven dynasty had always lacked. Kyle managed the internal restructuring, working with reformed military leaders and council members to dismantle the systems his father had built while maintaining enough stability to prevent collapse. He was good at reading people, at finding compromise between competing interests, at making the hard calls when diplomacy failed. Celine became the voice of accountability. She traveled constantly between territories, listening to grievances, investigating claims of corruption, serving as the living reminder that the triumvirate's power came from the people's consent, not divine right or military might. The three of them met every evening to review decisions, challenge each other's assumptions, and ensure that no single perspective dominated policy. The arguments were frequent and fierce, but they were honest. No hidden agendas, no manipulation, just three people trying to navigate impossible complexity together. The bond between Selene and Kael evolved slowly. Some nights they barely spoke beyond business. Other nights they stayed up until dawn arguing about philosophy and justice and whether people could really change or just learn to hide their nature better. 6 months into the triumvirate, Kael found Selene in the palace library late at night, surrounded by reports from the territories. "You're pushing too hard," he said. "You've been in 4 different regions this week. You barely sleep. The work doesn't stop because I'm tired. The work doesn't stop, period. But you're no good to anyone if you collapse." Celine looked up from the documents, seeing genuine concern in his face. "Are you trying to protect me again?" "Because we've had this conversation. I'm trying to remind you that strength isn't the same as indestructibility." Kael sat across from her. "You taught me that. Now I'm teaching it back." Something in his voice made Celine pause. The careful respect. The lack of command or expectation. The offering of care without strings attached. "Thank you," she said quietly. Kael's expression shifted to surprise. For what? For learning. For changing. For not being the man who stood on that platform and chose power over me. "I'm still that man." Kael's voice was heavy with self-awareness. "The capacity for that choice is still in me. I just hope I'm also learning to be someone who makes different choices when the test comes again." The honesty of it struck Celine hard. He wasn't pretending to be transformed, wasn't claiming redemption, just acknowledging the ongoing work of being better than his worst impulses. "Come here," she said. Kael moved around this table. Celine stood and pulled him close, not romantically, but with the fierce affection of soldiers who'd survived the same war. "We're going to make mistakes," she said against his shoulder. "Both of us. All 3 of us. We're going to hurt each other and disappoint people and fail sometimes." "Probably," Kael agreed, "but we're going to do it honestly. And we're going to fix it when we can and admit it when we can't. And that's more than this empire has had in 100 years. They stood like that for a long moment, the bond between them pulsing steady and real. It wasn't the destined perfection the old stories promised. It was better. It was chosen. It was earned. The one-year anniversary of the triumvirate's establishment was marked with a different kind of ceremony. Not celebrating their power, but honoring the people who'd been lost to get here. A memorial was erected in the palace grounds, listing every name of the royal family murdered 30 years ago. Princess Liana, Prince Corvin, King Aldrich, the real Elena Corvath who died protecting her princess, dozens of servants and guards and loyalists who'd been killed in the coup or the purges that followed. Elena stood before the memorial with tears on her face, finally able to publicly mourn the family she'd lost. Kael stood beside her, acknowledging his father's crimes without excuse or justification. And Celine stood on Elena's other side, representing everyone who'd suffered under the old system and fought to build something better. The gathered wolves observed a moment of silence that felt sacred in its weight. Then Elena spoke, her voice carrying across the assembly. "We cannot undo the past. We cannot bring back the murdered or erase the suffering inflicted by corrupt power. But we can acknowledge it. We can learn from it. We can build systems that make it harder for such betrayals to happen again." She looked at the memorial, at the names carved in stone. "My father used to say that the measure of a civilization wasn't its capacity for violence, but its capacity for justice. Not vengeance, not punishment, justice. The hard work of balancing mercy with accountability, tradition with progress, individual rights with collective good." Her pale eyes found the crowd. This empire failed that test 30 years ago. We failed it again at Kael's coronation. We've been failing it in small ways every day since. But we're trying now. Learning now. And that's the only way forward. The ceremony concluded with a planting. A tree for each of the murdered, roots going deep into the earth that had been watered with their blood. A living memorial that would grow and change and stand as testimony long after everyone present had turned to dust. Selena helped plant the tree for the young Princess Elena, the 9-year-old who'd been killed so the woman beside her could survive. As she patted soil around the sapling's roots, Elena knelt beside her. "She would have liked you," Elena said quietly. "My younger self. She was fierce and stubborn and believed the world could be better if people just tried hard enough." Celine sat back on her heels. Did the last 30 years kill that belief? No. Elena's smile was sad but genuine. Just made it more complicated. The world can be better, but it requires people willing to pay the cost of making it so. People like you who walk away from power when it's corrupt rather than being corrupted by it. I came back, though. Yes. Elena's hand covered Celine's, weathered and scarred and strong. But you came back as yourself, not as someone twisted into a shape that served others' ambitions. That's the difference between survival and surrender. They finished planting the tree together, two women separated by decades and trauma, but connected by the choice to build instead of destroy. That evening, the triumvirate gathered in their private council chamber for the first time in weeks. With the memorial ceremony complete, with the first year of their rule officially marked, they needed to make decisions about the next phase. Elena spread maps across the table, marking territories that were still unstable, regions that needed additional resources, areas where the new systems were thriving. "We've stabilized the core empire," she said, "but the outer territories are still fragile. They need more support, more infrastructure, more evidence that this new system actually serves them." Kael studied the maps, his expression thoughtful. "We could redirect military funding. We've cut the forces by 40%. Use those resources for roads, schools, communication networks." "That'll anger the military families," Celine said. "They've already lost influence and prestige with the restructuring. Then we make new opportunities for them." Kael looked up. "Civilian Service Corps, engineering projects, disaster response, ways to serve the empire that don't require conquest." The discussion continued for hours, the three of them challenging and building on each other's ideas. It was the work of governance stripped of glory, just hard problems and imperfect solutions, and the constant balancing of competing needs. But it was also the work of people who genuinely cared about the outcome, who saw their positions not as prizes to be hoarded, but as responsibilities to be shouldered. Near midnight, Elena called for a break. They moved to the balcony, looking out over the capital that had been built on blood and was slowly being rebuilt on something more solid. "Do you think it's working?" Elena asked. "Really working, not just holding together out of exhaustion and fear?" Celine considered that. "I think people are starting to believe it might work. That's different than it actually working, but it's necessary. You can't build without hope." Kale's hand found hers in the darkness, and she let it stay there. "The territories that tried to leave," he said, "the ones we let go with treaties instead of armies. 2 of them have asked to rejoin under the new structure." Elena's eyebrows rose. "Seriously?" "Seriously. They saw what we're building, saw that it's not just rhetoric, and they want to be part of it. That's something," Celine said. "That's evidence that maybe we're not completely insane." They stood together in the darkness, 3 rulers who'd all been broken by power and were learning to wield it without being consumed. It wasn't perfect. They still argued, still made mistakes, still had days where the weight of responsibility felt like it would crush them. But they were doing it together. That made all the difference. 2 years into the triumvirate, Celine returned to the Northern Territories where her transformation had begun. The settlement had changed. More permanent structures now. Gardens and training grounds and a school where young wolves learned history that included the uncomfortable truths about the coup and the old regime. Garrett met her at the border, older but still formidable. "Heard you've been busy," he said. "Reforming empires, building new governments, making history." "Trying not to repeat it," Celine corrected. "How are things here?" "Good. Better than good." Garrett walked her through the settlement. "We've had families from the south coming north. Not to hide anymore, but to be part of what we built here. Community based on survival and honesty instead of hierarchy and tradition." "That's what we're trying to build everywhere," Celine said. "I know." Garrett stopped at the memorial they'd built years ago for the murdered royals. "That's why we're watching, making sure you stay true to it. And if we don't, then we'll remind you. Same as we reminded the Draven dynasty what happens when power goes corrupt. It was a threat and a promise and exactly what Celine needed to hear. Accountability. The understanding that their power was conditional, granted by the people's trust, and revocable if that trust was betrayed. She spent a week in the north, training with the wolves who'd taught her to fight, listening to their concerns, carrying their voices back to the capital. On her last night, Elena found her by the fire. "You could have stayed here," Elena said. "After everything, you could have walked away from the triumvirate and lived quietly." "I thought about it," Celine admitted. "Still think about it sometimes when the council meetings go on for 8 hours and everyone's arguing about trade regulations. But you don't." "No. Because walking away now would be abandoning what we started. And I've already done that once. I know what it cost." Elena sat beside her, 2 women who'd both survived impossible odds through stubbornness and rage. "You've changed," Elena said, "since that first night when you arrived half dead from running. You're harder, sharper. Is that good or bad?" "Both." Elena's pale eyes reflected firelight. "The softness you lost was the part that would have let people use you. But the core of who you are, that fierce commitment to truth and justice, that's still intact. Maybe stronger for being tested." "I hope so," Celine said, "because the Empire needs that version of me. The one who won't compromise on principles even when it's easier." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. When Celine returned to the capital, Kael was waiting. He'd been managing a territorial dispute in the south and looked exhausted. "How bad?" Celine asked. "Manageable. 2 alpha families fighting over boundary lines that were poorly defined in the old system. We're surveying and mediating. Should be resolved in a month." He looked at her, and something in his expression made Celine pause. "What?" "I missed you." The words came out simple and honest. "When you're gone, the work feels heavier. Like I'm missing the part that reminds me why it matters." The bond between them pulsed warm, and Celine felt the truth of his words echoed in her own chest. She crossed the distance between them and kissed him. Not with the desperate passion of new love, but with the steady certainty of something built slowly over years of hard work and harder honesty. When they broke apart, Kael's eyes were bright. "Does this mean—" "It means I'm choosing you," Celine said. "Not because the bond demands it. Not because the Empire needs us to be united. Because I want to. Because you've spent 2 years proving that people can change if they're willing to do the work. She touched his face, feeling the stubble and the warmth and the solid reality of him. I love you. Not the way I would have if you'd chosen me at the coronation. This is harder, earned, scarred, but it's real. Kael pulled her close, and they stood like that for a long time. Two people who'd destroyed each other and rebuilt themselves and finally found a way to fit together that didn't require either of them to be smaller than they were. The empire continued to evolve. 5 years into the triumvirate, the changes were undeniable. Territory elected councils, public forums where citizens could challenge government decisions, transparent budgets and accountability measures, a military focused on defense and disaster response rather than conquest. It wasn't perfect. Corruption still existed in pockets. Some territories resented the changes. There were still people who believed the old ways were better, who whispered that strength came from dominance, not collaboration. But there was also hope, real, tangible evidence that systems could change, that power could be distributed rather than hoarded, that the cycle of violence and betrayal wasn't inevitable. On the 5-year anniversary, the triumvirate stood together before a gathering even larger than the original coronation. Representatives from every territory, citizens who'd traveled from the furthest reaches of the empire, even delegates from neighboring empires who'd been watching the experiment with interest and skepticism. Elena spoke first, her voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of survival. We stand here not as rulers by divine right or conquest, but as servants empowered by consent. Our authority comes from you. Our legitimacy is tested daily by whether our decisions serve the empire or our own interests. Kael spoke next, acknowledging the legacy he carried. My father built a throne on blood and lies. I inherited that throne and nearly perpetuated those lies through ignorance and arrogance. But this empire gave me a chance to be better, demanded that I be better, and I'm grateful for that gift every day. Then Celine spoke, her words carrying the fierce truth that had always defined her. 5 years ago, I walked out of a coronation because I refused to stand beside a man who chose power over principles. Today I stand beside 2 people who've proven that power and principles can coexist if you're willing to fight for it every single day. She looked at the assembled crowd. This empire belongs to all of us, not to bloodlines or dynasties or whoever can hold a throne through force. To every wolf who chooses to be part of building something worth protecting. That's the real revolution. Not who rules, but how we all participate in that rule. The gathering erupted in voices, not unified cheers, but the messy sound of thousands of people with different opinions and perspectives all being heard at once. It was chaotic and imperfect and beautiful. That evening, after the ceremonies and speeches, after the delegations had dispersed and the palace had quieted, the triumvirate gathered one final time in their council chamber. They were tired. Years of constant work and stress showing in the lines on their faces, the gray in their hair, the weight they carried in their shoulders. But they were also satisfied in a way that went deeper than accomplishment. They'd survived. They'd built something. And they'd done it without becoming the monsters the old system had created. Elena raised a glass, her scarred face showing something like peace. To the empire we've built, may it outlive us and outgrow us. To the people who forced us to be better, Kael added. To the truth, Celine finished, however painful it is to face. They drank together, 3 rulers bound by shared trauma and shared purpose. Outside the palace windows, the empire stretched into darkness, filled with wolves sleeping peacefully under a government that had finally learned that strength came not from domination, but from service. Not from fear, but from trust. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected when Kael had chosen Seraphine over Celine on that coronation night, but it was the ending they'd earned through blood and tears and the stubborn refusal to let betrayal define them. Celine stood at the window long after Elena and Kael had retired, looking out over the empire she'd helped save by first being willing to walk away from it. The bond with Kael pulsed steady and warm in her chest. The scar on her side ached with changes in weather, a permanent reminder of the price she'd paid. But she was here, alive. Powerful in ways that had nothing to do with crowns or thrones, she was the Luna who'd been rejected, who'd disappeared, who'd returned with truth as her weapon, and rebuilt an empire from its foundations. She was proof that sometimes the greatest strength was knowing when to walk away and when to fight, when to forgive and when to demand accountability. when to stand alone and when to stand together. The Empire would remember her not as the woman Kyle chose, but as the woman he could never replace. And that was legacy enough.